Welcome back, folks. My name is Meg Kruger. I'm the content specialist with Pioneer Athletics. And today we are joined by Brad Finn of the University of Houston, and we're going to be talking more baseball. So we're going to be going over some infield construction, hot topics, turf tips, and I'm going to let Brad take it away and introduce himself. Brad, go for it.
How you guys doing? I'm the assistant AD of grounds facilities and events at the University of Houston. Just a groundskeeper though. So excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad I let you take that title over because I messed it up so many times, but it sounded so eloquent coming out of your mouth.
Cool.
So Brad, we'll get right into the questions here. What are some of the basic elements to consider when, tackling a huge project like this and constructing a new baseball field?
So a lot of the areas that I always like to start with are you got to test what you got. You got to know what you have already currently there. And I also think you need to take into consideration your costs and what you're actually trying to achieve. And obviously that's playability. I've done 2 renovations now myself between, one of my prior stops, Rice University, and now the University of Houston. And I did a different process both times. So I think understanding your budget, what you have there, what you're trying to achieve are all, goals that you need to really address, if you want to call them pillars or whatever. But once you figure out your system and what you want to do, it kind of gets into, how, deep you want to go and some of those other questions, that you're going to ask yourself as far as, what's the best, situation for you and your program.
Definitely. And that rings true no matter where you're located, no matter if it's Parks and Rec or MLB. Taking a look at the budget and kind of what you have to work with at the beginning is a great place to start.
Definitely.
So you touched on it a little bit in the previous question as well, but the importance of moisture. Could you touch on, why it's so important to have, basic drainage and water availability when you're kind of taking over this project, but for the skin area?
Yeah. So obviously, there's so much with moisture. It's playability. You can really control if you want to play a faster game or a slower game. Your moisture levels can depend on that. If you, you can really move it to how your coach wants to play too. If she wants harder ground balls, we can make it harder. If she wants easier ground balls and softer and they're right there every single time, that's one thing we can do too. So the moisture, it really depends, your nightly watering, will help. And it also goes in your material of what it's holding. You want something that's going to be able to hold moisture, but also be able to push it through at the same time. So, that gets into various layerings, and that goes back into your scope of your project of like, are you going to break up those layers? Or are you going to just keep adding layers on? And maybe your moisture levels don't, percolate through well when, you have your, you're talking about surface tension and, breaking the different layers and moving water down through a surface, over the course of 12 inches. So, I know guys at the pro level who have 8-inch profiles to, even 12 that are just completely the same material and water can just move through those freely. There's nothing restricting it. Whereas like I had a situation where I had layering. I had probably 5 layers on my softball field, and basically, water tension works where it hits that point, it travels along that surface until it, breaks, and then it goes down, hits that next surface. So it's a pretty slow process when you're talking about water going through. And then that gets into drainage too. You have most places I've had a softball field at the University of Michigan. We had drainage all the way around, the foul area, which was great because we could pull the tarp and the tarp would just sit right onto those drains, and you can have a nice angular pitch or whatever, or a radial pitch, whatever, cone, and you're going right to those and it's sheathing to the outfield into those, drainage areas. And that's another thing you got to look at is where your drainage is. And, are you draining towards your outfield, or can you drain into your, behind home plate or your foul areas? There's just some other things you can do. And, I think that's one thing in my project, we have some drainage around our sides. I tried to do, a radial drain where it's pitching out towards the outfield and towards the home plate area. And, we're going to establish drainage over the course of time so that we can handle, a lot of water. Cause Houston rains quite a bit here. We get some big downpours, but yeah, I think that's all kind of, different, things where you need to, take in your drainage accounts of where you actually have some drains and your material levels to see how fast you can, move water through. And that all comes back to, I mean, I don't have a moisture meter, but, I know some guys have moisture meters and they can really dial it in to say, yeah, hey, 14 to 20% moisture of our clay is exactly where we need to do it. And that's, where like Derek Jeter loves his ground balls, right? So like, that's kind of how you can, gauge it. And some guys have it locked in that much, so I think over the course of time, I'd like to get to that point, and but that's some of the ways that I think a lot of people are moving.
Definitely. And, something that I'm sure goes hand in hand with that, and you touched on it a little bit, are, a good infield mix. So if somebody's looking to, reconstruct their infield and kind of select a new infield mix, what are some of the elements that you look for when selecting or reconstructing the infield in that sense?
So I used a particular infield mix. I won't go giving any free ads, I guess, because we're with Pioneer right now. But no, this company, they really break it down in their testing, which is incredible. And I think as much as now about like the grass science, I mean you look over the 10 years, over the last 50, right? Every 10 years there's been a huge leap in knowledge and science and what we're doing that I'm not shocked that we finally have gotten here with an infield mix that's like dialed in to a point that you can really say, yeah, hey, I have a lot of moisture available and I can water frequently because I have the staff to do it, or we can have a just as good infield and have a low maintenance into it, and I think they look at that, what you can input to the field, and then on the back end, I mean, they're looking at material. I mean, you talk about a makeup of soil, your sand, silt, and clay contents. I mean, typically you want to be, 60, 20, 20, which is 60% sand, 20% silt, 20% clay. And you think of clay infield, you want to have more clay, right? But in that case, you're chunking up more and you're actually dealing with a lot of that moisture stuff I was dealing with, prior to doing my project. But long story short, you get into those, that you think there's three basic numbers, but I mean, there's so many different particle sizes of sand that are in this, and there's so many different particle sizes of, clay and silt, and, finding the correct, makeup of a soil so that it's, it's draining right, but also holding and stuff. I mean, this company I use, they have that dialed in. And once I kind of understood that process, it kind of opened my eyes a little bit more to, really see what I'm inputting in on my fields and really what is going on and how this works. And I think that really helped me understand, you really got to look into your material. You got to understand, what you can put into this thing to make it the best you can. And I think that, I don't think there's a right answer either way. I mean, you're going to have challenges regardless, right? And I mean, that's the whole thing. But as far as the knowledge that's there now with infields, I think you can definitely go and find what you're looking for, depending on, what your input levels are, right? So.
Course. And if nothing else, if it's not something that you're an expert at, those people, are an expert. So really rely on those resources to kind of help you figure out what percentages you want to kind of incorporate on your infield.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about the importance of a proper grade to an infield. I'm sure that plays into moisture and drainage and everything like that. But take it a little bit further, and for someone like me, what is the importance of having, grade on that infield?
Yeah. So it's really just your, how your surface water is going to move. And you think about a torrential downpour, in the middle of a game, you want, obviously don't want puddles on your field. And it just, in the event that you don't put a tarp on for practice, right, you don't have these spots that are low spots and high spots and all that type of stuff. So, there's things you can do to protect your grade and all that sort of stuff. But basically at the start of a project, you can determine, like we were talking about earlier, whether you want that radial drain, which is pitched basically from like on a softball field. You start from the center, it's like a cone that drops out. And that's what I chose to do just because I didn't have adequate drainage at the time of the project. And we're going to be adding that. So I can change that over the course of time if I really need to. And even a baseball field, typically you're going to have it from the mound, you're going to have it falling out to the outfield, pretty standard. So like, you got to figure that out. And then basically, you know, from there, you talk about how, you know, how high you want that grade. And I've seen some as low as 0.5%, up to, you know, 2%, if not 3. And I think pretty standard is like 1. For my softball field, I went at 0.75%. And honestly, it's been fantastic. I had a lot of material on my infield and I had to bring down the center of it, which was, you know, it was, I mean, took about 6 inches off the entire surface, which is pretty crazy, and to add 3 back. And we had a curbing that went around, which we were way over. So we had a ton of water flowing off into our dugouts. And since doing this project in the drainage, I have only one spot. It's unbelievable. I just have one spot that gets a lot of this. It gets just a little too much flow, and we've been working on it. But the entire area around drains so perfectly. We haven't had any material moving at, you know, excessive rates to any side. So you can see that the drainage works. So it just goes to show, you know, you know, if you get those downpours, like we haven't really lost any game. We haven't lost any games this year. Maybe one practice due to some wind that took the tarp off, and it was just one of those things. But the next day we were back out there, and you'd be shocked with the amount of water that we had on this field. And you know, it just goes to show that even the material that you select and all that, it all plays a factor. And I mean, you don't lose games, and that's the biggest thing, you know, when you're talking about a Division I program for softball, for instance, or even it, then, you know, as you work your way at baseball, you know, you don't want to lose. You need to play and get better day by day. So
It's like a domino effect. Once a game, you know, has to be rescheduled, it's like so many different elements are into play there.
yeah. Oh yeah. It's a nightmare. You definitely don't want to get yourself into that.
Of course. If you guys employed any new technologies when, you know, taking over this project, or even in your previous renovation, if there were any technologies you came across that you know, could be useful to others to know about, or resources that you think are maybe not known by all that you had discovered along the way.
Gotcha. Well, I guess, you know, back to the no free ads though, but so if you use the Edge testing, I don't know if you need to bleep that or whatever, but if you use that testing, it's going to break it down so that you know what you have there. And I guess the new technology that I was going to think about using was that Field Saver, you know, amendment program, because basically, I mean, they look at what you have and they say, okay, yeah, you're missing this stuff, and that'll, you know, be off of, and they have 3 different packages. So they basically say, you know, you have this really good one, this one that's pretty good, and then one that's, you know, it'll get you through a season type of thing, you know, and it's good for like a little league field, you know. So you really got to ask yourself what you're, you know, where are you, and what's achievable and what you're trying to do. And I guess when you have those answers, you know, and I guess for me, it's like, we want to be at a high level. You know, I think college softball is not the pinnacle for most of these girls, but like, I mean, a lot of these girls, this is their peak as far as they're going to go in their playing career. And I think that you should give them the most opportunity that you really can give them. And I mean, there's no difference between a ground ball that you're going to get on an infield at a baseball field and a softball field. And I wouldn't be shocked if if our baseball coach at some point is going to want to come and take ground balls on this thing because of how good it is. And, you know, not saying it like that, but, you know, I think in actuality though, like, you know, we really looked at, you know, what we're trying to achieve here. And that was, you know, the top end of this Edge thing. And you know, that's where I went with it. And, it worked out where, you know, I was going to do this Field Saver thing, but I went with that 4-inch cap, like I was telling you. And, you know, I was able to get 4 inches of this really good material. And, I think that that's like the newer technology is that, you know, you're really starting to see what can, you know, it can be cost effective and you can get a really high quality, but you can also find ways to get the higher quality at the same time. But I think at the same time, it's like what your expectations are. And it's a level, I think, of like, there's this expectation level coming up from coaches and even, you know, groundskeepers of like where these infields need to be. And I think that you finally have a company that's coming up on the other side saying, yeah, here we are, you know, we can give you this, you know, and they're asking advice from people who've been around this for years, decades, and seen the transitions. I mean, I think everybody knows as well, even, you know, with this last year, I mean, anything can happen. Things progress and change so rapidly. And I wouldn't be shocked if other people start catching on to this, but you know, I mean, I think the testing and understanding the, you know, your particle sizes and what's going on, you know, subsoil wise, that is the newest technology that you have. And I think that some of the cultural practices too are starting to change based on that. Whereas like, you know, if it gets wet, I was always taught, yeah, you know, nail drag it, let it dry out and, you know, come back. Whereas now it's like, don't even open it up, just roll it, you know, like let it dry, do its thing, let the water drain and roll it, you know, push it, you know, get it nice and tight. And it actually plays better, surprisingly enough. And you know, and one thing that I've really started to research more of, and I think this is my thing, is that I've looked at clay tennis courts. You know, and like, I mean, clay tennis courts have been being played on for, you know, centuries. And I mean, you know, that's kind of crazy that you have a clay material, you have the ball bounce that you do. It's a lighter ball, you know, you're not, I mean, there's some different components to it. But it's interesting to me that, you know, you have such a solid surface and there, you know, you can have water, you know, to a certain extent, but they drain well and all these different things. So like, I've been looking at other avenues too. And I think that's the other thing. Like, I think there's a lot of, outside the box thinkers that are groundskeepers, and they're starting to think of these technologies and they're starting to bring them back in. You know, one of my buddies up in New England, his name's Pete. He works at Nobles in Greeno. He's a phenomenal guy. I'm sure you know him. And, you know, he was doing this project he was trying out using a wetting agent on his infield to either, you know, push moisture through or hold it. And I'm like, that's genius. Like, that's what it's for. I wouldn't recommend going to do this. I'm just saying, but like, those are some things though, that are, you know, we have guys trying this type of stuff and, you know, it's some of it works, some of it doesn't. And again, it goes back to that trial and error thing. I don't think there's like a definitive, yeah, hey, here's a book on how to have the best infield, right? I mean, you know, I think there's a lot to learn still. But I think we're taking the steps in the right direction. I think like just, you know, basically where we're testing and, you know, some of the cultural practices, those are starting to become a lot newer. And that's, you know, where, you know, what's nice about what's going on. So I'd say, you know, 5 years ago, you know, we were starting to scratch the surface with a lot of these companies, but now I'd say it's a completely different ballgame.